An author may use an informational text to explain how something works by breaking it down into the steps of a process. For example, let's consider social studies for just a moment. Social studies is comprised of different disciplines such as history, government, and civics. History teaches us important lessons about the past. Government helps us to understand how our country operates. And civics will teach us our rights and duties of being a citizen within our country. But what does this have to do with processes? Texts on history, government, civics, economics, and other social studies disciplines may describe processes that are related to social studies as a whole. As readers, we need to be able to identify those key steps in order to fully understand a process. For example, we may see in a government text the process for how a bill becomes a law. What steps are taken for a particular bill to finally get passed into law? That is a great example of a process within social studies. We will find that these steps typically come in a sequence. An author will use sequencing to put a series of events or actions in a specific order. They may put events in a chronological order. So they start with the earliest event and then describe the next one and then the next one. So chronological order is used when we put events in order by time or the time in which they occur. An author could use sequencing to show these steps in a process. For example, I mentioned just a moment ago that there are specific steps that must be taken for a bill to become a law. So the author will put those steps in order so that we can see the path that is traveled from the writing of the bill to its passing into law. An author can also use sequencing to show how a cycle repeats. It's fairly simple to identify a sequence. The easiest way to do it is to look for signal or transition words that clue you into the fact that the author is presenting things in steps. And we'll look at some of those signal words here in just a few moments. With chronological order, dates really help us too. We're able to see that if something happened in 1980 and then it leads to something in 1983, obviously we know that 1980 occurs before 1983. So pay close attention to dates as well. So why is sequencing so important? What's the big deal? Well, it helps us, especially in social studies, for example, when we are studying causes and effect, such as the causes of a war, or maybe how different battles lead to an end result. It helps us to identify that cause and effect relationship by seeing what happened and what was the result. When studying timelines, sequencing is also important to make sure that we are putting things in order that the events happened. It helps us see the sequence of events and make connections between them. Authors will use signal words or transition words or phrases to help us identify that they are describing something in a specific order. So these words will clue us in that we are looking at a sequence. Some common signal words to identify will be first, second, third. That could show us steps in a process or maybe what occurred first and then second and third in chronological order. They may use the phrase at the beginning, And at the end, they could say before, during, after, soon, then, next, following that. All of these words clue us in that what the author is describing is a sequence. Let's take a moment to look at an example to see if we can identify signal words and put the events in their proper chronological sequence. The American Revolution began in 1776. Several prior events led up to that point. The British government passed taxes on the colonies. The Sugar Act was followed by the Stamp Act. After these heavy taxes, colonists protested. These protests eventually led to the Revolution. First, let's identify our signal words. All right, remember, dates are important. So we are given the date 1776. So let's remember that. Several prior events. Prior is another signal word. Led up to, signal phrase. Was followed. After, led to. All of these are cluing us into this happened, then this happened, and then this happened. These words let us know we are looking at a sequence. Now, let's take the information presented and see if we can put these events in chronological order. So let's note, we begin with the date 1776. So we've already established that's important. What we need to pay attention to is the next sentence. Several prior events led up to that point. The words prior and led up to tell us that the events that follow happened before 1776. With that information, we can now put these events in chronological order. We need to pay attention to everything after this sentence first. The British government passed taxes on the colonies. Okay, so we see the first thing that happened is that they passed taxes. Specifically, the first tax was the Sugar Act. They passed the Sugar Act. Next, followed by the Stamp Act. After the Stamp Act passed, the colonists protested. These protests eventually led to the Revolution. So the final event that takes place in order is the American Revolution. Starts in 1776. Authors will also use informational text to provide us with the details that we need to follow a specific procedure. So let me ask you, have you ever followed a recipe? Or if cooking isn't your thing, have you ever followed the instructions to build something such as a bookshelf or maybe even a chair? What do these have in common? Recipes, instructions for building something are all steps of instructions or procedures. The way these work is that you begin with step 1 and then go to step 2 and then step 3 and so on. You read each step, follow the instructions, and perform those tasks in the order that they are given. In this example, we are presented with the instructions for the right steps of a procedure to change a tire on a car. So we see that it presents us with some information that we need before we get started. Before you begin changing your tire, make sure you are in a safe location, away from traffic, and on a level area. Look for a quiet side road or a wide breakdown lane and turn on your hazard lights. Then assemble your tools, most of which should be in the cargo area or trunk of the car. Then it tells us what materials that we need, such as spare tire, lug wrench, car jack, and the car owner's manual. And then finally, it goes into the steps for how to change the tire, beginning with putting on your parking brake. So let's think about that for a moment. Step 1 is to put on your parking brake. Why do we need to do that? Well, if we look closely at the opening paragraph, it provides us with clues to explain why step 1 is putting on the parking brake. Before you begin changing your tire, make sure you are in a safe location, away from traffic and on a level area. Once you have done that, then assemble your tools. So what do these clues tell us? Well, based on this information, we can infer that step 1 really is safety first. Putting on the parking brake is necessary to ensure that the car doesn't roll when we're changing the tire. It's a necessary safety precaution. Once we have ensured safety first, then we can proceed with the next step. Getting our tools, prying off the hubcap, loosening the lug nuts, and so on.